Grow still now. Let everything that was loud and insistent in your day become quiet. Not suppressed, not forced into silence, but gently, the way music fades at the end of a long phrase, the sound continuing into the silence that receives it, the silence made richer for having held the sound. Let your breath find the rhythm of something patient and old. Tonight we are going somewhere that exists at the boundary between the world we can see and the world we can only feel, between the sunlit earth and the deep interior of things, between the notes we hear and the silence that gives them meaning. We are going to follow a musician, a man whose gift was so complete that the world itself changed when he played. Trees bending toward the sound, rivers pausing in their courses, stones softening as if remembering what it felt like to be more than stone. We are going with Orpheus. Every great gift has a source, and every source has a story, and the story of Orpheus begins in the particular place where the divine and the human have always been most comfortable meeting, in music. His mother was Calliope, the eldest and wisest of the 9 muses. The muses were the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, Memory herself, born in Pieria in the north of Greece, 9 sisters who presided over all the arts and sciences that gave human civilization its deepest meaning. Calliope was the muse of epic poetry, the one who inspired the greatest poems, who breathed into the minds of Homer and Hesiod and all the great poets the capacity to say true things in beautiful ways that persisted across centuries. She was, in the understanding of the ancient world, the most honored of the 9. The one who held the longest and most complex stories. The one whose domain encompassed the full length of human experience from beginning to end. She was Orpheus's mother. His father, in the tradition most followed, was the god Apollo himself, the sun god, the god of music and of light and of the knowing that comes from attending to what is true. Apollo who drove his chariot across the sky each day, who presided over the oracle at Delphi, who played his golden lyre with a skill that was the source of all mortal musical skill. Calliope and Apollo, the muse of the greatest poetry and the god of music and truth, from these 2 Orpheus. He was born in Thrace, the northern country, above the settled world of the Greek city-states, where the landscape was different, more forested, more rugged, the mountains higher and more dramatic, the rivers more powerful, the winters longer. Thrace was considered by the Greeks to be a wild place, a border country between the Greek world and the beyond. And from that border place, from the edge of the known and the beginning of the unknown, Orpheus came. His childhood was the childhood of someone who has been given something extraordinary and is growing into the understanding of what has been given. He could always hear it, the music that was in everything. Not literally, not in a way that anyone around him could verify, but in the way that those with perfect pitch hear it, or the way that those with the deepest musical instinct hear it. The rhythm in the wind, the tonal variation in the sound of water over different stones, the complex chord that a forest makes when its many trees move together in a substantial breeze. He played before he had an instrument to play on. He hummed and he whistled and he sang, and the sound of his voice, even as a child, even before the training, had a quality that stopped people. Not the prettiness of a pleasant voice, though his voice was pleasant. Something deeper, a quality of trueness, a sound that seemed to come from a place more honest and more fundamental than performance. Apollo noticed his son. He came to Orpheus in the way of divine appearances in Greek mythology, not always dramatic, not always announced, sometimes simply as a presence at the edge of a path or a voice from a light in the trees, and he gave him the lyre. The lyre was not new. It had existed before. The gods had played it, mortals had played it. Music had been part of the Greek world since before the word Greek had meaning. But the lyre that Apollo gave to Orpheus was something else. Not because it was made of different materials, not because it had special properties inscribed into its wood and strings by divine craft. Though it was beautifully made, the crossbar of horn, the strings of gut, the whole instrument holding a resonance that ordinary instruments aspired to. It was something else because of whose hands it went into. Orpheus received the lyre and he played it, and the world answered. This is not metaphor. In the mythology of Orpheus, the world's response to his music is literal and documented. The trees moved toward the sound. Oak trees and pines and the flexible willows beside rivers, their roots staying in the earth but their trunks and branches inclining toward whoever was playing. The way a person inclines their head toward a sound they want to hear more completely. Rivers paused. the current continuing its work downstream, but the water directly around the player entering a different relationship with the channel that held it, slowing, deepening, becoming more reflective. Fish rose in the water to be nearer the surface where the sound was. Stones softened at their edges, as if the sharp geometry of rock was temporarily giving way to a more receptive quality. Animals came, the deer from the forest, the eagles from the heights, lions and bears from the wild places where they lived, sitting at the edge of the music's reach with the composed attention of beings who have discovered something they needed without knowing they needed it. This was Orpheus's music, not merely beautiful, generative, the kind of sound that does not simply travel through the air but interacts with what it passes through, leaving everything it touches slightly different, slightly more itself, as if the music was reminding every living and non-living thing what its essential nature was, and the reminder was received with gratitude. He traveled through the landscape of ancient Greece with the lyre on his back, and wherever he stopped to play, the landscape changed. Not permanently. When he moved on, the trees returned to their ordinary relationship with gravity. The rivers resumed their courses. But temporarily, in the time of the music, the world was different. More present, more listening. He played in the marble theaters of the Greek world, the sound of the lyre amplified and returned by the curved stone that was designed for exactly this purpose. He played in the sacred groves, where the priests and the worshippers gathered not to watch but to receive. He played at the edge of the sea in the evenings, the sound going out over the water and the water carrying it further, until the music was part of the sea and the sea carried it to shores where no one knew the name Orpheus, but everyone who was paying attention felt something change in the quality of the evening air. The ancient Greeks understood music differently from how we understand it. Not as entertainment, not as personal expression, though it was both of those things too. Music was, in their deepest understanding, a form of access to the structural truth of the cosmos. The philosopher Pythagoras, who came a little later than Orpheus in the mythological timeline, would eventually articulate this understanding in mathematical terms. The ratios between musical intervals corresponded to the ratios of the planetary orbits, and the whole universe was, in some sense, a harmony. The music of the spheres. Orpheus understood this before it was articulated. He understood it the way that great musicians always understand things before theorists can name them. From the inside, from the playing, from the specific felt knowledge of what happens when the right note is played in the right place and the world responds. He wandered through Greece with this knowledge, and he gave it away freely. He played for those who were grieving, and the grief did not disappear. It was not a cure, but it changed its quality. It became bearable. The specific unbearableness of grief is its isolation, the sense that no one else could possibly feel what you are feeling with the specific texture and weight that you feel it. Music dissolved that isolation, said, "Someone else has been here. Someone else has felt this deep and stayed." It passes through the music like a current. He played for those who were frightened. The music was not reassurance exactly. It did not claim that what was feared was not real. But it changed the relationship between the listener and the fear. It placed the fear inside a larger context, the context of everything that had ever been felt and survived and made into sound. And in that larger context, the fear was not smaller but was more navigable. He played for those who were simply living, the ordinary accumulation of days and seasons and the specific pleasures and difficulties that ordinary living contains. And the music gave those ordinary things a quality of significance they sometimes struggled to locate themselves. The music said, "This too. This ordinary hour of your ordinary life is also part of the song." This was Orpheus's gift, given to Greece and through Greece to the tradition that has carried his name forward to now. Not the specific melodies which are lost, we cannot hear what Orpheus played. But the understanding that music is this, a form of attention paid to the world that reveals more of the world than ordinary attention can. He wandered through the mountain meadows of Thessaly and through the sacred groves of Olympia and along the coastal roads of the Peloponnese, and the birds went with him. This detail is preserved in the mythology with a specificity that feels like observation, not the general category of birds but specific birds. The nightingale, whose song is already extraordinary, heard Orpheus playing and learned from him. The robin, the swallow, the thrush, each one picking up something from the music that passed through their world and carrying it into their own singing. The trees of Greece bent toward him. The rivers turned to listen. He was young and he was traveling and the world was rich with what his gift showed him of it. When Jason sent out his call for companions to sail with him to the edge of the world and bring back the golden fleece, Orpheus was among the first to come. This requires a moment of consideration, because it is not immediately obvious why a musician is on a list of heroes. The other Argonauts brought things that are easier to categorize. Heracles brought strength, Castor and Pollux brought skill and divine connection, Nauplius brought navigational knowledge. What does a musician bring? The ancient tradition understood perfectly well what Orpheus brought, and we have spoken of it in our story of the Argonauts. He brought the capacity to bring a crew of 50 extraordinary and individualistic heroes into coherent motion. He sat at the stern of the Argo and he played, and the oars went in together, and the ship moved at the speed and the rhythm that he set, and the sea was more navigable because of it. He also brought protection. At the Symplegades, those clashing rocks at the entrance to the Black Sea, his music was part of what got the Argo through. He played as the crew rowed with everything they had, and the music extended their capacity, gave them a half measure of additional endurance when their own endurance was at its limit. And the sirens. The sirens lived on an island that the Argo had to pass, and their song was the most dangerous sound in the Mediterranean. More dangerous than any storm or monster or strategic military threat. Their song did not kill through force, killed through beauty, through the specific, personalized beauty of a song that each individual heard as the thing they most needed to hear, the sound that answered the deepest and most particular longing they carried. For a crew of heroes, that was a genuine danger, because heroes carry specific and deep longings. Longing for home, for glory, for the resolution of the specific grief that each hero's life contained. The sirens sang those longings back to the Argonauts, and the Argonauts turned toward the sound. Orpheus played his lyre. He played something more beautiful than the sirens were singing. Not louder, the competition was not in volume, because the siren's song worked at a level below volume, at the level of personal resonance. He competed at that level. He played something that was more essentially true than what the sirens offered. The sirens offered the illusion of what each person longed for, the feeling of arrival at the thing you most needed. Orpheus played the actual experience of being fully alive in the moment of hearing something true. It was a close thing. Most of the crew heard both songs simultaneously, and the Argonauts rode through the sound like men walking through deep water, their effort enormous and their progress real. One man jumped. Beauties could not hold. Even the most beautiful and genuine music cannot reach everyone in every moment, and beauties leaped from the ship toward the siren's sound. Aphrodite caught him. The goddess lifted him from the water and set him safely down. The others rode on. Orpheus played until the island was behind them and the sound of the sirens was too far away to matter. He understood, after the sirens, something he had only partially understood before. That music did not protect through invulnerability. It protected through providing a better alternative. Through being true enough and beautiful enough that the false beauty of the sirens was revealed as false by contrast. He sat at the stern of the Argo with his lyre on his knee and looked out over the wake of the ship and thought about that for a long time. The tradition does not give us the details of the meeting. It preserves the fact of it, the love that resulted from it, the specific quality of what Eurydice was to Orpheus, which is preserved not in description but in the enormous weight of what happens when she is gone. We know what she meant to him because of how the world changed when she was no longer in it. That is how we know. She was a nymph of the meadows, a being of the natural world, connected to the growing things, the daughter of the living earth in the way that nymphs are daughters of the living earth. She moved through the world with a quality that the mythology associates with light on water. Not the source of the light, but its expression in a medium that receives it and gives it back differently, more variably, more alive. She heard his music. Of course she heard it. Everything in the natural world heard Orpheus's music, and the nymphs of the meadows and forests were among the most attuned to it. But she heard it the way very few heard it, not only as beautiful sound but as true sound, as sound that was saying something she recognized. He saw her, and something in him that had been directed outward, toward the world, toward the trees and the rivers and the sea, toward all the vast and various world that his music had always been in conversation with. That something found a particular and specific address. Found her. They were together in the way of mythology's great loves, Not elaborately, not with the drama of obstacle and conquest. Simply together. The way two things find each other when they are meant to find each other and the world provides the occasion. Orpheus played for her and the music was different. Not better, necessarily, the music he had played before her was genuinely great. But different in the way that any art is different when it has a specific beloved recipient. More personal, more urgent, more willing to say the particular and vulnerable things that art sometimes avoids in favor of the universal. She listened. She knew what she was hearing. They were married on a day in early spring, the meadow around them still holding the last of the winter's quiet, the first flowers coming up through the dark soil. Hymen, the god of marriage, came to bless the wedding, but the mythology notes that his torch smoked and would not burn clearly. The ancient Greeks read such signs carefully. The unclear flame was not a good sign. And yet the day was beautiful. And yet the happiness was real. She was walking in a meadow. The meadow was one of those places that the Greek world considered to exist at the boundary between safety and danger, not dangerous in itself, but open enough and free enough that the boundaries that ordinarily protected were more porous. She was with a group of nymphs, her companions, moving through the long grass in the warm afternoon. A serpent was there. She did not see it. Her foot came down and the serpent, startled, did what startled serpents do. She fell in the meadow, with the flowers around her and her companions beside her and the afternoon light still warm on everything. And by the time Orpheus was told, she was gone. By the time he found the meadow, the grass still bent where she had been, the flowers still turned toward the sky, the afternoon still holding its warmth. Eurydice was in the underworld. What Orpheus felt is one of those things that the mythology wisely does not try to describe directly, because the direct description would be insufficient. What the mythology does instead is describe what he did. He walked. He walked for days. Through the forests where he had played and the trees had bent toward him. He played as he walked, not with any intention, not with the deliberate choice to play, but because the music came out of him regardless of whether he was choosing it, the way grief comes out of us regardless of whether we are choosing it. The sound that came from his lyre in those days was something that the birds heard and fell silent in response to. Not because they were frightened, but because something in the sound asked for witnessing and they understood that silence was the appropriate witnessing. Rivers heard him pass and the waters slowed. The ancient trees of Greece bent toward the sound of his grief and remembered their own long griefs. The rings of hard years in their heartwood, the scars of lightning, the loss of their own beloved branches. He walked and he played and he arrived at last at the place in the Greek geography where the world above ended and the world below began. There were several entrances to the underworld in Greek mythology, and each carried its own specific quality. Orpheus came to the entrance at Taenarum, the southernmost point of the Peloponnese, where the Greek peninsula ended in a cape that reached into the open Mediterranean, the sea spreading in every direction. There was a cave there. The cave went down. He stood at the entrance and looked into it. The darkness inside was not the ordinary darkness of a cave in daylight. It had a quality of depth that ordinary darkness does not have, as if it were not merely the absence of light but the presence of a different kind of place. The air that came from it was cool and carried a smell that was not unpleasant, something mineral, ancient, the smell of earth that has been earth for a very long time and is comfortable with what it is. He went in. The passage down was long and the light from the entrance diminished behind him gradually in the way that the light of any strong source diminishes when you move away from it. First by degrees, then more quickly, until there was a point where he was genuinely in the dark. And then, gradually, a different light began, the particular illumination of the underworld, which the mythology describes as sourceless, ambient, the light of a realm that does not need the sun because it operates by different principles. He played as he walked. Of course he played. The lyre was his compass and his courage and his companion on the road, and in the strange in-between space of the long descent, the music was what kept him oriented. Not toward any specific direction but toward himself, toward the purpose that had brought him here, toward the love that was somewhere ahead. The sound of the lyre in the passage was extraordinary. The stone walls caught it and returned it, and the return was not a simple echo but something more complex. The sound coming back layered, the different frequencies arriving at slightly different times, so that what he heard as he walked was himself playing and all the echoes of himself playing simultaneously, a chord built from one voice but returning as many. He came to the river. The Styx was visible from a distance as a quality of the light ahead, a darkness within the ambient darkness of the underworld, a horizontal darkness that was the surface of the water, moving slowly in the way of rivers that are very wide and very deep. The sound of it was almost inaudible, a low and continuous suggestion of movement that was below the threshold of ordinary hearing but present. Sharon was at the bank. The ferryman, old in the specific way of beings who have been doing the same thing since the beginning of time and have reached a composure about it that is not quite indifference and not quite serenity but something between the two. He was tall and spare, his face weathered in the manner of those who have spent all of time out of doors in conditions that were not favorable. His boat was flat-bottomed and dark and moved in the water with the specific silence of something well maintained for its purpose. He looked at Orpheus with the assessment of someone who has seen every possible variation of the being who arrives at this bank and has learned to read them accurately from long practice. He said what he always said: the living did not cross. Orpheus played. He played for Sharon. He played the specific and honest music of someone who loves someone and has traveled to the edge of the world and beyond it because the alternative was to go on living without the thing that made living what it was. He played the specific grief of the meadow and the afternoon light and the serpent and the sound of his own name called with no answer. He played all of it, and Sharon listened with the composed attention of someone who has heard everything and knows the difference between performance and truth. The boat moved to the bank. Sharon said nothing further. He simply stood aside and let Orpheus board. The three-headed dog guarded the gate between the ferry's far bank and the underworld proper. Cerberus was not cruel. That is the wrong word for what he was. He was completely faithful to the function he had been given. He kept the living out and the dead in with the specific singularity of purpose that the greatest guardians have, the ones for whom the job is not a constraint on who they are but is identical with who they are. 3 heads, each one independently alert, independently perceptive, the 3 of them together providing a coverage of attention that was essentially complete. Nothing approached the gate without Cerberus knowing it, and nothing passed through the gate without Cerberus allowing it. Orpheus played. He played for all 3 heads simultaneously. This sounds like it should be impossible. You cannot look at 3 different things at once, cannot address 3 separate centers of attention with one piece of music. But Orpheus had spent his life playing for forests, for the oak and the pine and the willow and the birch, all differently shaped, all differently oriented, all with their own relationship to sound. He had learned, without knowing he was learning it, how to play music that found its listeners wherever they were and whatever their particular attunement was. The 3 heads of Cerberus heard him. Each one heard what it was capable of hearing, and what each one heard was sufficient to produce the specific response that deep music produces in any being capable of receiving it. A softening. Not of the vigilance remained because the function remained, but a softening of the defenses that stand between receiving and not receiving. The first head tilted slightly toward the music. The second followed. The third, after a moment, lay down. Cerberus did not move from the gate. He remained at his post. He was, to the last, a faithful guardian. But the posture of challenge and the posture of receiving are different, and in the change between them, Orpheus passed. He walked through the gate into the underworld. The underworld was not what he had feared. This is always the case, the mythology suggests, with the things we most dread. Approached, they reveal a nature that is more nuanced and less terrible than the imagination of distance had constructed. It was large, larger than any space Orpheus had been in before, even the open sea, even the mountain vistas of his wandering. The scale of it was beyond ordinary reckoning, a realm built for all the dead of all time, which was a very large number indeed, and the space had been shaped to hold them with the specific generosity of a realm that has infinite resources and no need to be economical. The light was not daylight and not darkness but something between, a quality of illumination that came from no single source but was everywhere, as if the air itself gave off a mild and constant glow. It was the light of a perpetual twilight, the specific gray gold of the sky just after the sun has set but before true dark has arrived. Peaceful in the specific way of that borderline hour. The shades of the dead moved through the asphodel meadows, those fields of pale flowers, gray-white, that moved in whatever passed for wind in the underworld with a swaying that was slow and deliberate, the movement of plants that have all the time that exists. The shades themselves were not suffering. They were not in pain. They had the quality of dreams remembered on waking, present but slightly attenuated, the sharp edges of mortal life softened to something more like suggestion. Orpheus moved through them playing. The shades heard him. They turned, or rather, they oriented toward the sound in the way of things that can still receive despite no longer needing to. And what Orpheus saw on their faces as the music reached them was something he had seen many times in the world above. The specific quality of recognition. The sense of, I remember this. This is what that was. The sound was returning them, briefly, to the fullness of what they had been when they were alive. Not back to life, not made more or less than what they were now, but given access again to the feeling of being fully present. The weeping was gentle, not the weeping of suffering, of pain or loss in the acute sense, but the weeping of something remembered, the specific quality of tears that come not from what is happening now but from what was once true. Even the punished were stilled. Ixion's will slowed in its turning. The boulder of Sisyphus paused at the top of the hill and stayed there, in a moment of arrested motion, the whole terrible mechanism of his punishment suspended in the music's current. Tantalus, who stood in his pool reaching for the fruit that always receded, found both the water and the branches still for a time. The Furies, those ancient beings of divine justice, the winged enforcers of the underworld's moral order, the Furies wept. This last detail is the one that Homer and Virgil and all the tradition that followed preserved as the most extraordinary indicator of Orpheus's power. The Furies weeping, the instruments of divine justice, who knew no mercy by design, who existed specifically to ensure that the consequences of wrong choices arrived, they heard Orpheus's music and wept. He came at last to the great hall of the Underworld palace. The palace of Hades was built on a scale appropriate to the ruler of the largest kingdom in the Greek cosmos, the kingdom that held every being who had ever lived. It was not ostentatious. It did not require gold or marble or the self-announcement of great architecture. It had instead the specific grandeur of something completely itself, built for what it was built for, proportioned correctly, solid in the way of things that will never be unmade. Hades sat on his throne. Persephone was beside him. She was dressed, as she always was in the underworld months, in the colors of the place, dark clothing, her hair contained, her face the face of someone who has accepted something enormous and found, in the acceptance, a dignity that was genuinely her own. She was not unhappy exactly. She was herself, which was complex, which held both the meadows above and the deep realm below in a dual knowledge that was its own kind of completeness. Orpheus stood before them and he played. The song he played in the Hall of Hades is the song that the mythological tradition has never been able to forget, despite not knowing its notes or its words or its specific duration. It is the song that made everything stop. It is the song that the Furies had already wept at, that had stilled the punishments of the underworld, that had moved Cerberus to lie down and Charon to carry a living man across the river of the dead. He sang of love. He sang of Eurydice. He sang of the meadow and the serpent and the afternoon light and the empty space in the world where she had been, a space that was the exact shape of her and that nothing else could fill because nothing else was her. He sang of what the world was like without her, and the song was honest. Not exaggerated, not performative, but accurate in the specific way that only genuine grief produces music that is accurate. He sang of the specific quality of absence, which is not simply nothing but is something, the negative space of the beloved, the outline of what is missing, as present as what remains. He sang of all mortal love, all the love that mortal beings carry for each other in the brief time they have, the love that knows its own ending and loves anyway, the love that is made more urgent and more tender by the certainty of loss. He sang for all of them, every pair who had loved in the upper world and been separated by what separates everyone eventually. He sang the song that all of them might have sung if they had had the gift. Persephone wept. She had been in the meadow when she was taken. She knew the meadow and the afternoon light and the serpent. She knew the exact quality of an afternoon from which everything changes. She heard Orpheus's song for Eurydice, and she heard in it her own story, differently told. And the weeping she had done in the first days of her underworld life, the weeping that had become Demeter's winter, came back to her in the hall of her palace as something more complete and more purified. Compassion, which is the grief of one person held in the heart of another. She turned to her husband. Hades had been still through the whole of the playing. Not unmoved still. The quality of his stillness was the quality of someone receiving something fully, allowing it to penetrate completely, not managing his response but simply having it. His face, which had the composed gravity of someone who presides over the most serious of all domains, showed something that his domain did not usually require of him: mercy. He spoke. He spoke with the specific care of a ruler who has just decided something significant and wants it to be clearly understood. He said, "Take her. Let her out. She can return to the upper world." He added one condition. The condition was this: on the ascent from the underworld back to the surface of the earth, Orpheus must walk ahead and Eurydice would follow. He must not look back. Not until both of them had emerged fully into the upper world. If he looked back before that, she would be returned to the underworld and this opportunity would not be offered again. Orpheus agreed. She came. Not the Eurydice of the meadow, not exactly, not the specific weight and warmth and particular presence of a living person. Her shade was more like what she had always been to him, seen from a very great distance. The essential quality of her, stripped of everything accidental. She was there in the underworld behind him in the way that memory is there, real, present, and not quite the same as the thing remembered. He walked. The passage out of the underworld was the same passage in reverse. The long corridor, the gradual shift of light from the underworld's sourceless twilight toward something that was beginning to suggest the direction of up. The sound of his footsteps on the stone. The sound of the lyre still playing, because silence was not something he could maintain in this moment. His hands found the strings and kept playing the specific music of hope, which is the most difficult thing to play without tipping into either certainty or despair. She was behind him. He could not hear her. The shades of the dead move without the sounds of the living. No footsteps, no breath, no rustle of clothing. The silence behind him was total and absolute and entirely consistent with her being there, following, as she was supposed to be following. It was also entirely consistent with her not being there. This is the specific cruelty of the condition, not that it was designed to be cruel, but that the nature of the situation made doubt inevitable. He could not hear her. He could not feel her. He could not verify by any of the senses available to the living that she was behind him. All he had was the agreement and the hope that Hades kept his word, and the music that was saying, keep going, she is there, keep going." He walked through the long passage. The light ahead grew, very slowly at first, then more steadily, the quality of it changing from the sourceless ambient glow of the underworld to something with direction. The light of the upper world, coming from the entrance ahead, the entrance that let in whatever quality of day or night was currently happening above Tinarum. He could see the entrance. He was almost there. The light from above was spilling into the last stretch of the corridor, and he could see the shapes of things around him resolving from the undifferentiated stone into the specific texture and color of real rock, and the air was changing warmer, carrying on it the smell of the world above, salt and green, and the particular sweetness of living earth. He was almost there. The mythology has been asked, in the 2.5 millennia since it was first told, why he looked back. Many answers have been offered. That he was overcome by doubt, that the silence behind him became too heavy, the absence of any verification too complete, and the fear that she was not there overtook the faith that she was. That love, which is always worried about the thing it loves, could not endure the uncertainty of the last few steps. That doubt is simply what love does in the absence of evidence. Others have said something more complex, that some part of him needed to see her, needed the specific confirmation that she was there in a way that faith alone could not provide. Not because he didn't believe, but because the seeing of her was its own irreducible need, distinct from the knowing of her presence, and the need became stronger than the instruction to withhold it. Others still have suggested that the looking back was, at some deep level, chosen. That Orpheus understood something about what he was doing and about what the world he was returning to would be, returning to it with Eurydice, but returning to the knowledge of what the world's edge had contained. And that the look was not failure but completion, the full circle of what had to be done, including the part that cost everything. The mythology does not tell us which of these is true. It simply tells us that he turned. He was at the entrance. He had almost made it. The light from outside was on his face, and the air from outside was in his lungs, and one more step would have brought him fully into the upper world. And he turned. He saw her. She was there. She was behind him, just as she was supposed to be, the pale, translucent form of her shade, her face turned toward him, her eyes meeting his in the moment of the turning. She was there, and he had looked, and the condition was broken. What passed between them in that moment, in the specific second of looking and seeing and understanding simultaneously what the seeing meant, the mythology preserves in a single word that Eurydice says, or almost says, as she begins to recede. Farewell. Not reproach. Not grief. Just this farewell. The word you say when you are departing and you want the one you are leaving to know that you loved them and that you understood, even at the last. She was gone. He stood at the entrance of the cave at Tinarum with the living world all around him. The cape and the sea and the sky and the sound of wind and water, and she was gone. He tried to go back. Of course he tried. He turned and he went back to the entrance of the cave and he played for Sharon and Sharon would not take him. The ferryman had given what he could give, moved once by what moved him, and the conditions had been what they were and the conditions had been broken and that was the end of what was available. He sat at the bank of the Styx for 7 days. He played, and the music he played in those 7 days was something that the mythology says no living person heard clearly, because the sound came from a place too deep for ordinary hearing to receive. But the river heard, and the underworld heard, and somewhere in the underworld, the shade of Eurydice heard the sound of the man who had come for her and had been so close, and the sound was a form of love that the underworld had not heard before and would not hear again. He returned to the upper world. He was changed, not destroyed. He continued, he moved through the world. He played his lyre and the trees still bent toward the sound and the rivers still slowed and the birds still learned from him. But he was changed in the specific way that grief at its deepest changes the people it visits. The music had a new layer to it, a depth that had not been there before or had been there in nascent form and was now fully realized. A specific quality of knowing. He knew what he had known before. The world's beauty, the world's music, the extraordinary privilege of being alive in a world that responded to music. And he knew now what he had not known before, the weight of what cannot be recovered, the specific gravity of the irreversible. The two kinds of knowing together made his music what it became in the years after Eurydice, the most complete music any mortal had ever played. The joy still in it because he was not destroyed, because joy is not incompatible with grief and often lives deepest in those who have known loss most fully. But the grief also in it, always the Eurydice note that ran through every song he played from that day forward like a thread of silver through a cloth of gold. He went to Thrace. His homeland, the border country, the place of wild mountains and powerful rivers and the specific quality of northern Greek light that was different from the southern light, darker in some way, more likely to hold clouds, more often the light of something building rather than something settled. He wandered through the Thracian landscape and he played, and the landscape received him in the way it always had, the oak forests inclining, the rivers of Thrace going quieter at the banks. The animals came as they always came, but there was something different in the quality of the animal attention now, something that the animals heard in his music that they had not heard before or had not heard so clearly. They heard someone who had been to the edge of everything and come back. He established, in his later wandering, the traditions that the ancient world remembered as Orphic, the religious and philosophical understanding that carries his name. The Orphic tradition is one of the most interesting threads in the history of Greek religious thought, and its heart was this: the understanding that the soul survives the body and that what happens to the soul depends on how the life was lived, and that the goal of living is to purify the soul sufficiently that when it returns, as he had returned from the underworld, it returns to something better. The Orphic initiates were vegetarians. They believed in the transmigration of souls. They had a complex theology of the afterlife that was more detailed and more hopeful than the mainstream Greek understanding. They had sacred texts, the Orphic hymns, and sacred practices and the specific quality of a religious community organized around the idea that death was not the end and that the work of living was therefore profoundly meaningful. All of this traced back to the musician who had gone to the underworld and returned, who had seen what was there and had come back with the knowledge that it was there and that there was also this, the living world, the music, the sunlight on the Thracian rivers, the trees that bent toward sound. He played in the evenings by the river. He played in the mornings when the mist was on the water and the birds were beginning. He played at midnight when the stars were at their height and the world was at its most still. The music continued, different from what it had been, deeper from what it had been but continuous. The gift, which had been given by Apollo and shaped by Calliope and refined by years of wandering and then by the specific education of the underworld, the gift had not been taken away. It had been enlarged. The mythology gives Orpheus an ending. The Maenads, those ecstatic followers of Dionysus who were not always gentle, came to him in Thrace, and he did not survive the encounter. The mythology is honest about this. He died. But what happened afterward is one of the most extraordinary details in all of the tradition. His head, separated from his body, cast into the river Hebrus, floated downstream singing. The lyre floated beside it, and the riverbanks heard, and the sea heard where the river met it, and the island of Lesbos received the lyre and the head and gave them burial. And from that burial place, from the island of Lesbos, came the great lyric poets of the ancient world, Sappho foremost among them, that extraordinary voice who made poetry that still sounds 2,500 years later like the truest thing anyone has ever said about love. They grew from the ground where Orpheus's lyre was buried. This is the mythology's way of saying, the music continued. The specific musician died, as all musicians die, as all mortals die. But the music itself, the tradition, the capacity, the understanding of what music can do when it is truly played, that continued. It went into the earth of Lesbos and came up as the lyric tradition and spread from there across all the centuries to everywhere that true music has been played. The stars also received him. Orpheus was placed among the constellations. His lyre became Lyra, that small and brilliant constellation visible in the summer sky. On summer nights, when the sky is clear and the Milky Way is visible, Lyra is there, the instrument of the greatest musician the ancient world imagined, made permanent in the arrangement of light across the sky. He is there now, above you if you are in the northern hemisphere on a summer night, and above the hemisphere itself if you are not. The lyre of Orpheus, turning slowly with the rest of the sky in the patient ancient wheel of the constellations. There is something that the mythology of Orpheus has always been giving to those who encounter it, even when they encounter it without knowing quite what they are receiving. It is this, the understanding that music, true music, the music that comes from the deepest and most honest place, does something that nothing else does. It enters the places that are closed to other things. It crosses boundaries that nothing else crosses. It goes where logic cannot go, and where comfort cannot reach, and where the ordinary consolations of human social life are insufficient. The underworld in the myth of Orpheus is not only the actual underworld of Greek cosmology. It is also the internal place that every person has, the place where the grief lives that is too old or too deep for ordinary light to reach. The place where the wound from the unbearable thing has gone. The place where what was irreversibly lost is kept in the amber of memory. Music goes there, not to fix it, not to reverse what cannot be reversed, but to go there and be present in it, to play in the dark, to let the music fill the caverns of the interior with sound, so that the person whose interior that is knows they are not alone in there. This is what Orpheus did in the underworld. He played in the dark and the shades heard, and the Furies heard, and Persephone wept, and Hades was moved. Not because the playing fixed anything. When Orpheus left, the underworld returned to what it was, Sisyphus to his boulder, Ixion to his wheel, but because the playing witnessed, because the playing said, I am here in this place with you, with all of you who are carrying what you are carrying, and the music is here too, and the music knows what you carry because the music can hold everything. Orpheus looked back. This is the part that the tradition has sometimes read as failure, and sometimes read as something else. He went to the underworld for love. He played the most extraordinary music ever played in the history of the world, in a place where music had never been played. He moved the immovable. He earned the impossible gift. And at the last moment he turned to see her. Perhaps this was weakness. Perhaps it was simply love, being what love is, unable to receive without needing to see, unable to trust without needing to verify. Perhaps the condition that was set was always impossible, not because it asked too much of his obedience, but because it asked too much of his love. Because love cannot sustain the 7 steps of not looking when the beloved is so close and the silence behind is so complete. Or perhaps, and this is the interpretation that the Orphic tradition itself seemed to favor, perhaps the turning back was not failure but the completion of something. The full circle of a story that required a man to go to the underworld and return, but also required him to carry the underworld back with him. To know it from the inside, to have been all the way down and all the way back, and to carry both experiences together in the music that would come after. Because the music after was richer for what had been lost. The music of his later years, the music that gave rise to the lyric poets of Lesbos, the music that went into the earth and came up as Sappho, that music contained something that the music before Eurydice had not contained. It contained the knowledge of the underworld, the knowledge of the dark, the specific and irreplaceable knowledge that comes only from having gone there. Let us end where the story wants to end. Not at the river, not at the underworld entrance, not at the moment of turning. But here, at night, in a forest, in Thrace, or wherever the forest most fully comes to mind as a forest where a musician might be sitting in the darkness playing his lyre. The trees are there, not moving toward the sound tonight, just present, their bark dark in the starlight, their branches holding the sky above in the specific way that trees hold sky, the stars visible through the gaps between the leaves. An owl is somewhere in the upper branches, its presence marked by occasional sound and more often by the sense of being observed by something that sees perfectly in the dark. The river is nearby. Its sound is the sound of the forest's interior life. Continuous, various, the specific note of this river in this place, water over these stones and around these curves. The river has been here since long before any human came to this forest, and the river will be here long after, and the river makes its sound not for any audience but because making the sound is what rivers do when they move over stone. Somewhere in the sky, lyre is turning. The lyre of Orpheus, set in the stars by the gods or by the tradition that needed to mark what had been, turning slowly with the whole great wheel of the constellations in the patient arc of the night. And somewhere in the sound of the river and the wind in the trees and the owl's occasional note and the insect's continuous undertone, somewhere in all of that, woven into the night's own music, there is something that might be the echo of a lyre played by a man who loved a woman and went to the edge of the world for her. Not the specific notes, not anything you could transcribe or prove, but a quality in the sound, a quality of attention, of witness, of the specific thing that music does when it is played by someone who has been to the deepest place they can go and has come back with the playing still in their hands. The world is singing. It has always been singing. The birds know this. The rivers know this. The stones know this because they were once told. And Orpheus, wherever he is in the tradition that has kept him, in the stars, in the earth of Lesbos, in the music of every poet who has ever tried to say the true thing in the beautiful way, Orpheus is still playing. Still going toward the music that is most honest. Still walking in the direction of what is most loved. Still, at the last, turning to see. Let the music of the night hold you now. The sound of the wind, or the rain, or the silence that has its own music when you are quiet enough to hear it. Let your breath be the instrument, in and out, the simplest rhythm, the oldest song. You have been to your own underworlds. The private deep places where the grief lives and the memory of what cannot be recovered. You know something of what it costs to go there and to come back. You know something of what the music sounds like in the dark. Let it be with you now, that music, not asking you to do anything with it, not requiring you to go anywhere or carry anything, just the music in the dark, and the stars turning, and the river making its sound. And somewhere, very faintly, in the quality of the silence between sounds, a note. A single sustained note, clear and true, from a lyre that has been playing since the world learned that it had a song. Rest in it. You are held.